Let's start with some of the institutions that brought you down. Let's start with the role of the Victoria Police. It created a task force that trawled for complaints, that searched for people that might have been abused by you. They started with the presumption you must have abused someone, went to the media and appealed for people to come forward.
They did. They advertised for business.
Advertised for business. They eventually found, it thought, 9 such people. It charged you with 28 separate offences involving those 9 people. Every single one of those charges has fallen by the wayside as completely preposterous or ultimately just been overturned. Not one survived because they were obviously too weak. Do you think the police were out to get you?
Well, that's not a question for me. I don't know. There's a little Latin tag that says nobody's a good judge in his own situation.
Would you disagree with me when I say, to me, that seems a pattern of persecution by the Victoria Police?
Well, I think to be a little bit legal, I think the onus on them in the face of that evidence would be to show why that's not true.
Many of those 26 charges were clearly a joke, preposterous. Some involved you supposedly taking a boy out of a boys' home several times to rape him on an altar, even in public at a cinema where he supposedly screamed, is sitting on your lap for 3 minutes, screaming from the pain. No one apparently notices. What gets me is that the police charged you, even though it turns out that the boy didn't live at that home in the year that supposedly happened. You didn't work at that home. The film you allegedly took him to didn't screen there that year.
Well, that's correct.
Were you amazed at the utter sloppiness of the police investigation?
I was, and that's a classic case. I mean, this is St Joseph's Home business. I was hardly ever there. Given it is 40 or 50 years ago, it's difficult to say you were never...
I think your evidence was that you were there once.
That's right, when they were closing it down. And I mean, and all the nuns say that, and actually we've got other witnesses too. Now, some of the kids reckon I was there, but of course, you see, I wasn't well known in the 70s the way I am now. How in the hell would you know who was coming in terms of a young cleric or a young brother or something like that?
Give you another example. One of the 4 charges that the High Court overturned involved you allegedly in full robes after Mass, accompanied by a priest right next to you in a small corridor crowded with 50 choristers. You allegedly, according to this police charge, of which you were convicted, jumped on one boy out of the blue, pushed him against the wall, squeezed his testicle hard. Police charged you, you were convicted. Police did not investigate, did not interview one single witness. They just accepted the boy's word. I ask you again, does it not seem to you that the police had an agenda to get you?
Well, I don't know how you explain it, but it is certainly extraordinary. And I mean, they had to be pressured into speaking to the choristers. I think it was the prosecution, after some period of time, it might be a couple of years, got them to do that. That paralleled...
And the choristers, by the way, all said they didn't recall any such thing.
Exactly, yes.
How would you react if the Victoria Police were to keep trawling for victims, keep trawling for attempts to prosecute you?
Well, I wouldn't be entirely surprised, but who knows, that's their business.
Is there an anti-Catholic agenda in Victoria, in its institutions, both the Victoria Police and the Victorian Court of Appeal, which found 2-1 that no, the convictions were fine, you stay in jail?
Well, I've seen too many people to go from possible to probable to a fact. Certainly, people do not like Christians who teach Christianity, especially on life and family and issues like that. They get very, very, very cross. So, to the extent that it's that's for other people to judge.
In Victoria, you had a police force that charged you 26 times with charges so stupid not one has survived the process.
Yes.
Including charges where they did not interview a single witness.
Yes.
You have a Supreme Court a Court of Appeal that's just been criticised for the High Court for not taking matters properly into consideration in your defence. And you've got a Premier of that state, Dan Andrews, that savaged Tony Abbott, the former Prime Minister, for daring to come and speak to you in jail as a friend of yours. Are you worried about Victoria, Dan Andrews, being the Premier of a state that seems so determined, its institutions at least, from one interpretation, I don't know if it's true, but seems so determined to get you?
I'm no longer in Victoria. I think...
You're free to speak.
I am free to speak. It's difficult to understand motives, but all the factual evidence that you have presented is actually true. And I think each can draw his own conclusions. The culture wars are real. There is a systematic attempt to remove the Judeo-Christian legal foundations, well, the examples of marriage, life, gender, sex, and those who oppose that, unfortunately, there's less rational discussion, and there's more playing the man, more abuse and intimidation, and that's not good for a democracy.
So you think you're a victim of the culture war here?
I think that contributed.
There's one more institution, taxpayer-funded, national institution, the role of the ABC.
Mm-hmm.
For years it has demonised you. I can't recall a single presenter or journalist that's ever spoken in your defence. It devoted an entire 7:30 program to claims against you, not one of which has resulted ultimately in you being found guilty. ABC journalist Louise Milligan wrote a whole book about claims, again, not one of which has stood the test. And ABC journalists like Barry Cassidy are still claiming you are not innocent. Does the ABC's role in your persecution concern you?
Yes, it does, because, I mean, it's partly financed by Catholic taxes. I believe in free speech. I acknowledge the right of those who differ from me to state their views. But in a national broadcaster, to have an overwhelming presentation of one view and only one view, I think that's a betrayal of the national interest.